And we directly move on with a keynote being presented by Dr. Dominik Haitz. Dr. Dominik Haitz is a data scientist at E.ON Kundenservice Netz, a digital service company being part of the E.ON group. And he's talking about how to make sure your AI initiative fails. The stage is yours.
Can I use one of the portable?
Yeah, it's possible for sure.
Yes. So, hi everyone. In the 2 days here, I'm sure you've heard some great talks on big data and AI. You heard some great expert advice, lots of different opinions, maybe even some differing views or conflicting advice on the future of AI. And maybe this is similar to the situation in your companies, where there are also different opinions on what the future of your business will be like, which paths to take, or which technologies you should invest in. In that case, how do you decide whose advice do you follow? There may be different people with a different opinion. Whom do you trust? Maybe there are experts in your company you trust more on others, you rely on them because you know that their opinions, their predictions for the future are more accurate than others. But how do we know this? How do we find those people? In general, how do we know which people best predict the future? I mean, it's a really interesting question, one that is relevant, I think, not only for businesses and AI, but also for society as a whole. And this question was studied, for example, by the psychologist Philip Tedlock. You can read about it in his book, Super Forecasting. And what he did is he studied the predictions from the political predictions from commentators or experts, and in hindsight, he was able to measure the accuracy of their predictions. And then he looked for common traits to figure out which experts were better at predicting the future. So, and what he found was quite interesting, I think. He found that there are broadly 2 groups of forecasters. And he called them hedgehogs and foxes. According to an ancient Greek fable where it says, the hedgehog knows one big thing, but the fox knows many things. So, one big thing, what does this mean? This means that hedgehogs are the types of people or experts or forecasters who have one central idea at the core of their thinking. It's sort of like an AI thought leader for whom every problem you have boils down to you not using AI enough, or like a blockchain guru who will tell you that everything that is wrong with your company is due to underutilizing blockchain. The hedgehogs are people who are very confident forecasters. They are typically charismatic and offer very convincing advice. Sort of like the people you might see in talk shows. Foxes, on the other hand, don't have a central idea at the core of their thinking. They derive their insights from a multitude of sources. They are very, very skeptical people, skeptical even of their own predictions. And instead of the shiny buzzwords from the hedgehogs, the foxes gave rather complicated advice that is usually very specific to the situation or the problem at hand, and always depending on context. Which group do you think made better predictions for the future? It was the foxes, the experts who had detailed knowledge of a certain thing, we're able to much better assess situations or predict the futures. For example, Tedlock studied the predictions on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the predictions from politicians, left-wing or right-wing, but the people who were most right about what was to happen were regional experts with an in-depth knowledge of the countries and the culture and the ethnic fault lines. And also, maybe if you think about think of advice you've ever received, like there might be generic advice, but most often advice that is really helpful is specific to a certain problem or a certain situation. So, what does this have to do with AI? How can we use this to better develop an AI strategy? So, I think that taking this into account and these results, I think we should base our AI strategy on what the foxes tell us. I mean, in your companies, if you do AI because you've heard somewhere that AI is the future of business, or because someone told you that it's AI or die for every company, this might not be the best strategy. It might be a good starting point or something to think about, some inspiration. But I think if you make your AI strategy really work, you should listen to the experts in their company and what they can tell you about the problems in your specific business areas. Like could be problems that they think should be tackled with machine learning solutions or potentials that can be realized with machine learning approaches. And then develop an AI strategy that is specifically tailored to the situation in your company. So if you've done this, if you want to go along, how then best to structure and organize your work? In the 20th century, mankind took on endeavors on a larger scale than ever before, like the Apollo moon landing program, which at its peak had, I think, more than 400,000 people involved. How do you organize and structure such an insane amount of work? In the 20th century, different models or methods emerged. One of the most prominent ones being the project model, where you have a predefined set of requirements or a goal, and you figure out the most efficient way to achieve that goal within time or budget constraints. So, according to the official definition from the Project Management Institute, a project is a temporary endeavor with a unique result. And while this method certainly has its uses, I don't think it's a particularly good one or particularly well suited to the development of AI solutions or modern software solutions, which is what you usually want to end up with when doing an AI initiative. And my opinion or my view is shared by others, notably the Agile coach Alan Kelly, who has done some great YouTube talks and also written a book on the subject, where he advocates for replacing the project model with an approach he calls continuous digital, which focuses on continuity for modern software development. And he argues that the classic project model is built on the assumption that the requirements are static, which is just not true anymore in our modern VUCA world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, with requirements the environment ever changing, with hardware and software constantly changing all around us. While a project by definition is temporary with a fixed goal that can be achieved, modern software is rather a continuous endeavor. For example, think of Microsoft Office. Can you imagine a point where Microsoft Office will ever be truly done, truly finished. It's not like a project that has a goal that can be achieved. It's rather this continuous endeavor, this product that is constantly adapted and refined and improved to create more value, focusing on the value created, not just at you would in the project model, focusing on keeping within schedule and budget. So while the project model has its uses, I think for the development of AI solutions, a product mindset is a better approach. Regarding team structure in this model, what Alan Kelly advocates for is something called amoeba teams, which is a concept you might be familiar with under different names, be it like BizDev, Ops, or squads. Your team is your value production unit responsible for a product. It encompasses all necessary skills from business to development to operations to be as autonomous as possible. It's stable, but not static, which means it can grow or shrink, split or merge according to the value it delivers. So I think the product mindset and this concept of autonomous teams are a good fit for doing AI solution development. Just keep in mind that these approaches are templates that shouldn't be taken at face value, but always adapted to the specific situation in your companies. After these 2 days of lots of talk and slides and input, you maybe want to relax and take a walk, maybe in one of the forests outside Berlin. There's an interesting story to these forests, or to forests in general. Forests have served humans ever since as a cheap source of wood, as an important material for building, tools, weapons, or as heating material. And this has, wood has been so important that many times an unsustainable use has to deforestation and the lack of wood causing major crises or sometimes even the demise of entire civilizations. This has happened at various times in parts of the world, but also here in Germany at different times. For example, in the 17th or 18th century, after the population had recovered from the 30 Years' War. And what happened then is that some people, some government officials, came up with an interesting, clever approach to tackle this problem. And they called that concept scientific forestry. From the 18th century, I think it was very typical for the spirit of the Age of Enlightenment at the time. And what they envisioned was that one should do away with all the old, inefficient, historically grown forest, but then replace it with, you take the tree with the highest yield of wood and then place the trees in a rectangular grid, spaced as tightly as possible. And you standardize the planting and cutting methods, and you have the perfect, efficient forest. The best source of wood you can imagine. Sounds great, sounds really efficient and simplified from a high-level management point of view, but it didn't work out so well. After like 1 or 2 generations of trees, it became clear that the trees didn't grow so well anymore because the soil, the mineral composition in the soil wasn't sustainable. The tight spacing made these artificial forests prone to diseases and wildfires, and the lack of herbs or wildlife caused a problem for the local peasant villages. So while this approach of scientific forestry seemed very efficient and rational and clean and neat at a management level point of view, it caused a lot of problems at the ground level. This story is the prime example of a pattern described in a book by James C. Scott, Seeing Like a State. Other examples being Soviet agriculture and modern-day city planning. And the main point of the book is something I would phrase as beware of top-down standardization without understanding ground conditions. That means if there is a solution or an approach you think from above that is really efficient and standardized and looks very simple and great, it might not work very well at the ground level. So I think this is not only relevant for forests, but also for companies where there are also forced standardization initiatives, like someone mandating all teams now use Scrum, use this or that approach, follow the Spotify model, maybe even use the same technologies or the same API design or whatever, which might look great from a high level point of view, but causes a lot of problems at the ground level. However, I don't think this means you shouldn't do any standardization or harmonization efforts, or you shouldn't do any central strategic planning, but just be careful if you force it too much, because it might look simplified and efficient, but it doesn't work well for everybody. So to wrap this up, some pieces of advice. I think a great basis for an AI strategy is the advice of the foxes, the experts with the in-depth knowledge, which can help you deliver solutions that are not generic, but are specifically tailored to the circumstances and the situation at hand in your companies, the problems and potentials. I think the product model is a great fit for developing AI software solutions, better maybe than the project model. And empowered autonomous teams are an important building block of AI success. But for the teams and for approaches, give them sufficient space to adapt and don't force standardize them too much. And coming back to the actual title of the talk, if you want to make your AI initiative fail, then just disregard this advice as much as possible. Thank you.